He had it all: wealth, power, influence. But behind closed doors, Ethan Cole was a monster. A billionaire who beat his pregnant wife to entertain his so-called friends. But Claire? Claire wasn't just a victim. One will think of a calm pregnant woman as a victim, but when she had it up to her neck, she became a storm waiting to break. And when she strikes, no amount of money, circle of friends, or empire could save him. So grab your popcorn, hit that notification button, and subscribe as we take you on a storytelling cruise. The Blackwood mansion glittered like a palace that night. Chandeliers spilled golden light onto marble floors, and the air was thick with champagne, perfume, and the greedy laughter of men who had never been told no in their lives. Ethan Blackwood, billionaire CO, heir to a fortune built on steel and oil, stood at the center of it all like a king hosting his court. He wore arrogance like a crown, every smile practiced, every handshake calculated. And beside him, like an accessory meant only to enhance the spectacle, was his wife, Claire. Claire moved slowly, one hand resting on her rounded belly. She was 6 months pregnant, and her body ached from the weight she carried. But more than her body, it was her spirit that sagged. She had once dreamed of a simple, happy life, of love and family. Instead, she had become the silent shadow of a man who thrived on control. Her gown was silk, deep emerald that shimmered when she walked. Ethan had chosen it for her, like he chose everything she wore. "It makes you look less swollen," he had said with a smirk earlier that evening. She had smiled politely, swallowing the sting. That was what Claire had learned to do best: endure. The mansion was filled with Ethan's friends, politicians, theos, men with more money than morals. They smoked cigars that cost more than most people's rent and spoke of people like numbers, dismissing lives as if they were stock shares. Claire drifted through the crowd, silent, invisible. A few women noticed her, offered tight smiles, then turned back to their conversations. She was the pregnant wife, the trophy. What stories could she possibly add to the game of power? "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan's booming voice rose over the hum of chatter, "to success, to power, and to loyalty." Glasses clinked. Cheers followed. Claire stood at his side, smiling faintly, though her heart was far from the moment. She could feel her baby kick gently inside her, as if reminding her of the only pure thing she had left in her life. She pressed her hand to her stomach and whispered in her mind, "I'll protect you, no matter what." But Ethan noticed. He always noticed. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist tightly enough that she gasped. He leaned down, his smile never faltering for the crowd. "Don't make that face," he hissed in her ear. "You're ruining the mood." She blinked back tears, forcing her lips into another smile. "I'm fine," she whispered. "Good." He released her with a little shove, turning back to his guests. Hours blurred by. The party grew louder, rowdier. Alcohol flowed like rivers, and the laughter turned harsh, almost cruel. Ethan was in his element, shouting jokes, clapping his friends on the back, basking in their admiration. And then it happened. One of his friends, a politician from New York, slurred, "Ethan, how's the wife doing? Carrying that kid all right?" Ethan smirked, glancing at Claire. She was across the room now, sipping water quietly. "She's fine," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Though between us, she's more whale than woman these days." The table roared with laughter. Claire froze, her face burning. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her. Ethan wasn't done. "Come here, Claire," he called. Reluctantly, she crossed the room, her steps slow, her body heavy. "Show them the bump," Ethan said, grinning. "She's carrying half my fortune in there." A few men chuckled awkwardly. Others glanced away. But Ethan's cruelty only escalated. "Stand straight," he ordered. "Don't slouch. You look like a tired cow." The laughter came again, sharper this time. Claire's eyes stung with humiliation. She tried to step back, but Ethan grabbed her arm. "Dance with me," he said suddenly. She shook her head. "Ethan, I..." "Dance?" he snapped, his smile wide for the guests but his eyes cold. Music was playing faintly in the background. Ethan pulled her into the center of the room. She stumbled, her body not built for this right now, but he held her tightly, forcing her to move with him. "Smile," he growled through clenched teeth. Her cheeks trembled as she tried, but tears slid down anyway. She couldn't stop them. The guests shifted uncomfortably, murmuring. But no one spoke. No one dared to embarrass Ethan Blackwood. And then, as she stumbled again, Ethan shoved her backward. Not hard enough to knock her down, but enough that she gasped loudly. Enough to make the crowd laugh again, because if Ethan laughed, they followed. The betrayal burned in her chest like fire. When she tried to step away, he yanked her arm back and slapped her across the face. The sound echoed in the glittering hall. Gasps filled the room. 1 or 2 people looked away. But most simply chuckled nervously and drank their wine. Claire stood frozen, her cheeks stinging, her body shaking. Her baby shifted inside her, as if sensing the violence. She pressed her hand to her stomach again, whispering without words, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Ethan leaned close, his breath hot against her ear. "Don't you dare make me look weak," he hissed. Then he released her, turning back to his friends. "Apologies, gentlemen. You know how emotional women get." The men laughed again, though uneasily this time. But the damage was done. Claire walked out of the hall, silent, her gown trailing behind her. Upstairs, in the dim silence of their bedroom, she collapsed onto the bed. Her body hurt, her heart ached, and her spirit felt like shattered glass. She pressed her face into the pillow and wept silently, not for herself, but for the life growing inside her. That was when it hit her. She couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't raise her child in this house, under this man, surrounded by this cruelty. Ethan had taken everything from her, her dignity, her freedom, her joy. But he would not take her child. Her tears dried slowly, replaced by something sharper, colder. Rage. She sat up, her face still swollen from the slap, and whispered into the silence. "This ends with me. He will regret this." For the first time in years, Claire felt something like power stirring inside her. That night, when Ethan finally stumbled into the bedroom, drunk and laughing, she pretended to sleep. But her mind was wide awake, her thoughts racing. When he collapsed onto the bed, snoring within minutes, she turned her face to the ceiling. And she made a silent promise. "I will rise. I will take everything from you. And when I'm done, Ethan Blackwood, you'll beg for mercy." Her hand drifted once more to her belly, and she smiled faintly in the dark. Not for Ethan. For herself. For her baby. For revenge. The morning after the party, sunlight spilled over the mansion like nothing had happened. Servants moved silently through the halls, clearing glasses, vacuuming confetti from the marble, pretending not to notice the lingering tension that clung to the air like smoke. Claire sat at the vanity in the master bedroom, her face carefully blank as she dabbed foundation over the bruise forming on her cheek. Every brushstroke was mechanical, almost detached, as if painting over pain could erase it. Behind her, Ethan sprawled across the bed, phone pressed to his ear, barking orders to some unfortunate executive. He was still riding the high of last night's party, oblivious to the humiliation he had left in his wake. "Sell it all," Ethan snapped. "I don't care what it takes, just make the numbers work. If I wanted excuses, I'd hire my wife." Claire froze for just a second, her brush pausing mid-stroke. Then she resumed, silent. When the call ended, Ethan tossed the phone aside and stretched. "Another brilliant night," he said smugly. "They'll be talking about it for weeks." Claire turned her face slightly, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "They'll be talking about it," she said softly, "but not the way you think." Ethan frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She smiled faintly, setting the brush down. "Nothing. Just, people notice more than you realize." He narrowed his eyes but said nothing, rolling out of bed. "I've got meetings. Don't wait up." He left without a kiss, without even a glance at her stomach. The door slammed, and silence rushed back into the room. Claire sat still for a long time, staring at her reflection. For years she had accepted his cruelty, telling herself it was temporary, that maybe one day he'd change. But last night had stripped away the last thread of that illusion. He would never change. So she would. Slowly, Deliberately, she opened the drawer of the vanity and pulled out the slim, silver recorder she had bought months ago and hidden away. It was small, unassuming, something Ethan would never notice. She held it in her hand, the weight of it feeling almost sacred. If he wanted to humiliate her in public, she would expose him in private. Her revenge would not come through screaming or crying. It would come through proof. Through patience. Through striking when he least expected it. The first recording came that very evening. Ethan stumbled home drunk again, his tie loose, his shirt half unbuttoned. He smelled of whiskey and expensive perfume that wasn't hers. Claire sat in the corner of the bedroom, knitting quietly, the recorder hidden beneath the folds of her shawl. "Why are you sitting there like a ghost?" Ethan barked. "You think you scare me with that silence?" Claire didn't answer. He staggered closer, pointing a finger at her. "You're nothing without me. Nothing. Do you understand that? You're lucky I even put up with you." Her heart pounded, but her face remained calm. Every word he spewed was captured, every insult stored away like ammunition. When he finally collapsed into bed, she clicked the recorder off and tucked it safely into her sewing basket. The second recording came days later, when Ethan, in a fit of rage over a failed deal, threw a glass across the room, shattering it near her feet. "You stupid woman," he roared. "I should have left you the day you got pregnant. Now you're just dead weight." Her hands shook, but she kept her voice steady as she replied, "Maybe one day you'll regret saying that." Again, the recorder hummed quietly, storing the evidence. But Claire wasn't just recording. She was planning. She began to pay attention in ways she never had before. Every conversation Ethan had, every secret phone call, every glance between him and his so-called friends, she noticed it all. At night, while Ethan slept heavily, she combed through his discarded papers, memorized his schedules, and slowly pieced together the cracks in his empire. Ethan believed he was untouchable. Claire knew better. Even kings fall when their castles rot from within. And his was already rotting. One evening, Claire slipped away from the mansion under the guise of visiting her doctor. Instead, she went to a small cafe on the edge of town. There, in a quiet booth at the back, sat a man with tired eyes and a leather satchel. Adrian. He wasn't a stranger. Adrian had once been one of Ethan's most trusted lawyers, until Ethan ruined him. "Claire," Adrian said softly, standing as she slid into the booth. "I wasn't sure you'd really come." "I had to," she said, her voice low but steady. "I need your help." Adrian studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You know what you're asking, don't you? Going against Ethan, it doesn't just destroy careers. It destroys lives." Claire met his gaze without flinching. "He's already destroyed mine." For the first time in years, she saw someone believe her. Truly believe her. She reached into her bag and pulled out the recorder, setting it on the table. "This is just the beginning. I need to build a case against him. For myself. For my child." Adrian picked it up carefully, listening to a few seconds before setting it back down. His eyes hardened. "You're braver than I thought." "I'm not brave," she whispered. "I'm desperate." Adrian leaned closer. "Then desperation might just be your weapon." Back at the mansion, Ethan grew restless. He noticed Claire watching him more. He noticed her silence turning sharper, more deliberate. And though he didn't understand it, some part of him began to feel it, the shift in power, subtle but undeniable. One night, he cornered her in the hall, his breath hot with whiskey. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he sneered. "Walking around here with that smug little face. What are you plotting, Claire?" Her heart raced, but she kept her voice smooth. "Plotting? I'm just being a good wife." He shoved her against the wall, his hand pressing against her collarbone. "Don't lie to me." Her stomach tightened protectively around her baby. Fear clawed at her chest, but she forced herself to smile faintly. "If I was plotting, Ethan, you'd already know. You're too smart to miss anything." The flattery worked. He smirked, releasing her. "That's right. Don't forget who holds the power here." As he walked away, Claire exhaled slowly, her hand trembling against her stomach. But inside, her resolve only grew stronger. He had no idea. The third recording came weeks later. This one was different. Ethan, in a fit of drunken bravado, bragged to his friends over speakerphone about how he had put his wife in her place at the party. Slapped her so hard, the cow nearly cried on the floor, he laughed. The men on the other end laughed with him. Claire sat silently in the corner, recording every word. When the call ended, Ethan noticed her watching. "What are you staring at?" he barked. She smiled faintly. "Nothing." But in her mind, she whispered, "Everything." By the end of the month, Claire had hours of recordings. Enough to destroy Ethan publicly, socially, financially. But she wasn't ready yet. She needed one more piece, something undeniable. And she knew it would come soon. Ethan was unraveling. The cracks were spreading. His arrogance made him sloppy, reckless. It was only a matter of time before he handed her the dagger she needed to end him. Until then, she waited. And planned. Because revenge, she was learning, wasn't about rage. It was about patience. And Claire Blackwood had learned to wait. The Blackwood mansion glittered like a palace that night, chandeliers glowing against the polished marble floors. But behind the polished perfection, shadows moved. Claire drifted through the dining hall, silent, while Ethan laughed at the head of the table. A dozen men in tailored suits surrounded him, politicians, businessmen, parasites who fed on his wealth and arrogance. The air reeked of cigar smoke and bourbon, their laughter booming loud enough to rattle the windows. She had learned long ago to be invisible in these moments. To serve drinks, to smile faintly, to endure the sideways glances that said she was nothing more than decoration. But tonight was different. Tonight, Claire's recorder hummed quietly in her apron pocket. "Gentlemen," Ethan bellowed, slamming his glass down. "Let me tell you about women. They're like horses, you've got to break them before they're useful." The men roared with laughter. Claire's fingers tightened around the tray she carried, her knuckles white. She kept her head bowed, her face calm. "And my wife," Ethan gestured toward her with his cigar, "took some breaking. Isn't that right, Claire?" The room turned toward her. The laughter hung heavy in the air, waiting. She lifted her head slowly, meeting Ethan's eyes. "Whatever you say, dear," she said softly. Ethan smirked, satisfied. The men roared again. Claire turned and left the room, her steps light, but inside, her resolve hardened like steel. Hours later, when the guests had stumbled out and the mansion finally quieted, Ethan found her in the kitchen. He was drunk, swaying, his shirt stained with whiskey. "What was that little act in there?" he slurred. "You trying to embarrass me?" Claire didn't look up from the teacup she was washing. "I was just agreeing with you." He slammed his fist on the counter, making her jump. "Don't you dare mock me." She turned slowly, her eyes steady. "I wasn't mocking you." For a moment, silence crackled between them, charged like lightning. Then Ethan shoved her back against the counter, his hand pressing against her stomach. "You think carrying my child makes you special?" he hissed. "You're nothing. And don't you forget it." Claire's breath hitched, fear gripping her chest. But then, something inside her snapped. She smiled faintly. "One day, Ethan, you'll wish you had treated me better." For the first time, Ethan faltered. Just for a second. Something in her tone unsettled him. But then he scoffed, stepping back. "You don't have the spine." He staggered out of the kitchen, muttering under his breath. Claire stood frozen for a long time, her hand pressed to her stomach. Her baby. Her only reason to endure. But no more. She picked up the recorder from her pocket and pressed stop. Every word he had said tonight was hers now. Evidence. Proof. Power. The next day, Claire slipped out to meet Adrian again. The cafe was busier this time, chatter and clinking glasses filling the air. She slid into the booth, her shawl pulled tight. Adrian leaned forward. "You look different." "Do I?" she asked softly. "Yes." "Harder." He studied her face. "What happened?" Claire slid the recorder across the table. "Enough." Adrian clicked it on, listening as Ethan's drunken voice filled the air. His jaw tightened with every word. By the time it ended, he looked at her differently. Not with pity. With respect. This, he said quietly, could ruin him. Publicly. Legally. Claire's lips curved into a faint smile. Good. Adrian hesitated. But you have to be careful. If he finds out. He won't, she said. Her eyes burned with quiet fire. Not until I'm ready. Adrian nodded slowly. Then we'll need allies. Someone in the media. Someone in law enforcement. Claire's smile widened. I already have someone in mind. Back at the mansion, Ethan's arrogance only grew. He hosted more dinners, more parties, each more lavish than the last. His empire was crumbling behind the scenes. Adrian had told her that much, but Ethan drowned the cracks in liquor and laughter. And every time he raised his glass, every time he raised his hand, Claire was there. Watching. Recording. Waiting. One night, Ethan brought a woman home. Not discreetly, not in secret. He paraded her through the front door like a trophy, laughing as if daring Claire to object. This, he announced loudly, is what a real woman looks like. The woman giggled nervously, glancing at Claire. But Claire didn't flinch. She simply pressed record in her pocket. When Ethan finally disappeared upstairs with his mistress, Claire sat alone in the living room, the recorder humming quietly on the table. Her hands shook, but not from sadness. From clarity. He was giving her everything she needed. Rope to hang himself with. The breaking point came a week later. Ethan threw another party, louder and wilder than ever. He was drunk before the first toast, his words slurred, his laughter manic. At the height of the evening, with all his friends gathered around, Ethan turned to Claire. Sing for us, he roared. Come on, make yourself useful. The room erupted with laughter. Claire froze, her throat tightening. When she didn't move, Ethan's smile vanished. He strode across the room, grabbed her arm, and yanked her forward. I said sing, he shouted. Claire stumbled, catching herself on the edge of the piano. Her stomach throbbed with pain, fear flashing through her veins. And then, something inside her shifted. She straightened slowly, her face calm, her eyes steady. No, she said. The room fell silent. Ethan blinked, stunned. What did you just say? I said no. Her voice was clear, strong, unwavering. For a moment, no one moved. Then Ethan's face darkened with rage. He raised his hand. But before he could strike, Claire's voice cut through the silence. Go ahead, she said softly. Hit me again. In front of everyone. Let them see. The room went still. The men shifted uncomfortably, their laughter dying in their throats. Even Ethan hesitated, his hand trembling in the air. Slowly he lowered it. Claire smiled faintly. For the first time, she had beaten him. Not with force. With fear. Because Ethan Blackwood had just realized something he had never considered before. His wife was no longer afraid of him. That night, after the guests had gone and Ethan had collapsed in a drunken stupor, Claire stood in the library, the recorder clutched in her hand. She whispered to herself, to the child growing inside her, to the silent walls of the mansion. It's almost over, she said. I promise you. It's almost over. And for the first time in years, she believed it. The morning after the party, the Blackwood mansion was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Claire sat at the kitchen table with a cup of untouched tea, her eyes fixed on the recorder in front of her. The night's events still replayed in her head. Ethan, drunk and wild. Ethan demanding obedience. Ethan faltering, hand raised but never landing the blow. For the first time, she had seen it. Fear in his eyes. Not hers. She pressed play, letting the cruel laughter and venomous words fill the room. Then she stopped it abruptly and tucked the device into her pocket. It was time. Adrian met her at the same cafe, his expression sharp and cautious. He slid into the booth and leaned forward. Are you ready for what happens once this goes public? He asked. Claire's hands rested on the recorder. I've been ready for years. Adrian studied her face. Once we release this, there's no turning back. He'll come after you. He already has, she said softly. And if I keep waiting, he'll take everything. My child. My sanity. Maybe even my life. Adrian exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Then we'll need more than recordings. We need documents. Evidence of financial crimes. Proof he isn't untouchable. Claire nodded. I know where to find them. The mansion study was Ethan's sanctuary, his fortress of power. But it was also his weakness. Claire had watched him lock away papers, ledgers, flash drives, never knowing she was memorizing every detail. That night, after Ethan collapsed in the master bedroom, reeking of whiskey, Claire crept down the hall. Her heart pounded as she slipped into the study, the air heavy with cigar smoke and leather. The safe loomed behind the desk, gleaming black steel. She knelt, recalling the code she had seen him punch in countless times. Her fingers trembled as she pressed the numbers. The door swung open. Inside lay stacks of files, crisp bills, and drives labeled with dates and names. Evidence. Years of corruption, bribes, embezzlement. Claire's breath hitched as she pulled them out one by one, stuffing them into a tote bag she had hidden under her shawl. Each document was a nail in Ethan's coffin. When she finally closed the safe, her reflection stared back from the steel door. She looked different. Stronger. For the first time, she didn't look like a victim. The first domino fell a week later. Headlines exploded across the city. Blackwood Corporation under investigation for fraud. Anonymous source provides evidence of widespread corruption. Ethan woke to the news splashed across the television, his rage filling the mansion like wildfire. He hurled the remote across the room, shattering it against the wall. Who did this? He roared, pacing like a caged animal. Who's trying to take me down? Claire stood in the doorway, calm, her hands folded over her belly. You've made a lot of enemies, she said softly. Ethan turned on her, his eyes bloodshot, his face twisted with fury. Don't play games with me, Claire. She met his gaze, unflinching. I'm not. For a moment, he searched her face, suspicion flickering. But then he scoffed, shaking his head. You're too weak for this. Claire smiled faintly. If you say so. The walls began closing in fast. Investigators subpoenaed Ethan's accounts. Politicians who once smiled beside him refused his calls. Business partners distanced themselves overnight. At every turn, Claire watched him unravel. His empire, once untouchable, now bled out in the open. He lashed out harder at home, his temper boiling. But every time he shouted, every time he threatened, Claire pressed record. The evidence grew. And then, Claire made her boldest move yet. It was a Friday evening when Ethan stormed into the mansion, his tie undone, his shirt wrinkled. He looked like a man drowning, every bit of his power slipping through his fingers. He poured himself a drink, his hand shaking, and collapsed into the leather chair by the fireplace. Claire entered quietly, setting down a tray with tea. You think you're so clever, don't you? He muttered, staring into the flames. Claire tilted her head. What do you mean? I know someone's behind this, he said, his voice low and bitter. I know they're feeding the press. But whoever it is, I'll crush them. Just like I crush everything. Claire's lips curved faintly. Maybe not this time. Ethan's eyes snapped to her, narrowing. For a long moment, the firelight flickered between them, shadows dancing across their faces. Careful, Claire, he whispered. You're playing with fire. She leaned closer, her voice steady, her eyes unblinking. Maybe I'm the fire. Ethan blinked, stunned. For the first time, he saw her not as a fragile wife but as something far more dangerous. And for the first time, he looked afraid. The next morning, the story broke bigger than ever. Exclusive, Blackwood CO's history of abuse exposed by leaked recordings. Ethan's voice filled the airwaves. His cruelty. His laughter. His admissions of violence. The world that had once worshipped him recoiled. Social media erupted with outrage. His investors withdrew. His board demanded answers. At home, Ethan exploded. He tore through the study, ripping files from shelves, searching desperately for the leak. He stormed through the halls, shouting, smashing glasses against the walls. And Claire? She sat in the nursery, quietly humming as she folded baby clothes. Her calmness enraged him more than anything. He burst into the room, his face twisted with fury. It was you, wasn't it? Claire looked up, her eyes cool and steady. Prove it. Ethan froze, his breath heavy, his fists clenched. But he couldn't. Not without revealing more of himself. And that was the genius of it. Claire had finally trapped him. That night, as rain lashed against the windows, Ethan sat alone in the study, a bottle half empty beside him. His empire was collapsing, his power slipping through his fingers, and his wife, his quiet, obedient wife, had become something he no longer recognized. Something he feared. He stared into the fire, whispering to himself, "She'll pay. One way or another, she'll pay." But even as he said it, deep down, Ethan knew the truth. He wasn't the predator anymore. He was the prey. And Claire was coming for the kill. The world outside Blackwood Manor no longer bent to Ethan's will. The gates once guarded by loyal staff now stood watched by reporters. Every day the newspapers screamed his disgrace. Blackwood Empire crumbles under investigation. CEO accused of domestic violence. Wife's recordings leak. Investors withdraw as police launch criminal probe. The empire he had built on fear and control was collapsing, piece by piece. But inside the house, Ethan still prowled like a lion in a shrinking cage, refusing to admit defeat. He stormed the halls, drunk on whiskey and rage, muttering about betrayal, about snakes, about vengeance. His eyes were bloodshot, his once impeccable suits now wrinkled and stained. Claire watched him carefully, never flinching, never looking away. She was no longer the trembling wife he paraded like a trophy. She was something sharper, honed by years of pain into a blade he never saw coming. And tonight she would cut. It began with the gala. Despite the scandals, Ethan announced he would host one final event, a charity dinner to prove his power remained untouched. The board begged him not to, but Ethan was obsessed. "They'll see I'm still in control," he snarled. "They'll see I can't be broken." Claire said nothing, only adjusted the glittering gown he insisted she wear. Inside, she carried her final weapon. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, violins playing as guests arrived in gowns and tuxedos. But the air was heavy, suffocating, charged with whispers. Every eye turned to Ethan, waiting to see if the headlines were true. He raised his glass, smiling with forced charm. "Rumors are for the weak," he boomed. "I am still Ethan Blackwood. And this," he spread his arms wide, "is still my world." Applause followed, but it was hollow, hesitant. Then Claire stepped forward. She moved like a vision, her diamond earrings catching the light, her posture regal. But her eyes were knives. "Your world," she said softly, but the microphone carried her voice across the hall. "Or a prison you built for everyone who loved you?" Gasps rippled. Ethan froze, the smile cracking. "Claire," he hissed under his breath. "Sit down." But she didn't. Instead, she reached into her clutch and pulled out a small device. She pressed play, and Ethan's own voice filled the room. Laughter. Cruel, but drunken. "Watch this," his voice sneered. "She'll cry if I push hard enough. She always does. Weak little thing." The room fell silent, the horror sinking in as more clips played, his boasts, his threats, his admissions. Every lie stripped bare. Ethan staggered, his face draining of color. "This is fake. It's all fake." But no one believed him. Not anymore. The board members left first, their faces like stone. Then the donors, muttering as they abandoned him. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, guests turned away. And Ethan Blackwood, the man who once commanded a city, stood alone in the center of the ballroom, his empire dissolving before his eyes. Back at the mansion, the storm finally broke. Ethan slammed the door behind him, his roar echoing through the halls. "You ruined me," he bellowed, shoving vases from shelves, shattering glass across the marble floor. Claire followed him calmly, her heels clicking softly. "You ruined yourself," she said. He spun, eyes wild. "You think you've won? You're nothing without me. Nothing." She didn't flinch. "I was nothing because of you. But not anymore." He lunged at her then, his hand raised to strike, just as he had so many times before. But Claire was ready. She sidestepped, sending him crashing into the wall. His body hit the portrait of his father, shattering the frame, glass slicing his cheek. Blood ran down his face. For the first time, Ethan stumbled. And Claire stepped closer, her voice low and steady. You wanted entertainment for your friends that night. Do you remember? You wanted them to see you beat your pregnant wife. Ethan froze, panting, blood dripping into his eyes. Claire's lip curled. Now the world has seen. And they're watching still. The final blow came not from her hands, but from the law. Police cars rolled up the mansion drive, their sirens piercing the night. Officers stormed the house with warrants in hand, demanding documents, seizing hard drives. Ethan tried to resist, shouting, cursing, threatening. But when the cuffs closed around his wrists, he finally broke. "Claire!" he screamed, his voice cracking, desperate. "You think you've won? You'll regret this. You'll regret." His words were cut short as they dragged him out, blood streaked down his face, tears mixing with it. Bloody tears. Claire watched from the doorway, her arms wrapped around her belly. She said nothing, only met his gaze one last time. And then she turned away. The next morning, the papers declared it official. Blackwood's arrested in fraud and abuse scandal. Claire Blackwood breaks silence, praised for courage. From victim to victor, a new era begins. The city buzzed. Ethan was finished. The empire was hers to rebuild, or burn, if she chose. Adrian visited later that week, finding Claire in the garden, sunlight warming her face. "You really did it," he said quietly. Claire glanced at him, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "No," she corrected. "He did it to himself. I just showed the world." She rested her hand on her belly, her eyes steady. "And now," she whispered, "my child will never grow up in his shadow." That night, as the city lights flickered in the distance, Claire stood at the window of the mansion that was now hers. The empire no longer reeked of fear. It was quiet, peaceful. For the first time in years, she breathed freely. And in the reflection of the glass, she saw herself not as a victim, not as a wife, but as something else entirely. A survivor. A queen. The storm that tore the king from his throne. And as the night deepened, Claire Blackwood smiled. Because Ethan's power had ended with bloody tears, and hers was only beginning. Thank you for watching. Please do not forget to subscribe, hit the notification button, and stay tuned for our next story. Bye.